Awesome. First question is, or first tip, whether the student is ready to earn the score she or he needs. This means that you know what you're likely to score now, and also what you need to be highly competitive at your target schools. There's little reason to take the test yet if the answer is no to either of those questions.
Yeah, so I think the main sort of motivation behind this is you need to know what you're going to score when you go into the test. Taking the actual SAT can't be the first time you've ever taken a practice SAT. You should have some idea of what's going to be on the test and what your score goals are and what's a realistic result for you on the test. And to do that, you have to take practice tests.
Right. I think it's really important to have sort of quantifiable, tangible, achievable goals, not just at the end of the process, but throughout the process. So, if you have numbers that you can strive for at 3 weeks of preparation, at 6 weeks of preparation, at 8 weeks of preparation, you can feel good about yourself and have confidence that, okay, this is working, I'm working towards a goal that I'm going to achieve. I think it really, it'll help your test taking and your test preparation.
Yeah, and to do that, you need to know how the test is scored and how everything on the test then corresponds with that score. And if improving in one area is going to help you improve in another area, or improving in one area is going to help you make so many score gains in that as well. So it comes down to information and what you know about the test and what you know about your own personal performance on the test and your strengths and weaknesses.
Managing your time.
Right, and that goes into the second point on this list, which is realistically, a lot of us aren't going to score 2400s on this test. We're not going to get perfect scores, and so there comes a point in your study where you have to set those realistic goals that you set for yourself, in the sense that do I need to get every single math question on this test right, and can I actually get every single math question on this test right in the amount of time they give me, or would I be better served if I just don't really attempt the most difficult math questions and sort of conserve that time and save that time and use it on questions that are within my ability level and make sure that I can get those ones right on test day. So I'm increasing my score 200 points beyond that.
Yeah, I think that your point is sort of analogous to, say, a baseball player going into the batting cages. Maybe it's great if you can hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, but if you can't, then going into the batting cages and trying to hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball is just going to be frustrating, and you're not going to accomplish anything. So sort of focus on what you can achieve, what you're capable of, and go in and maybe bat against a 65-mile-an-hour fastball and knock it out of the park each time.
Yeah, and I think in general there's too much emphasis placed on getting a perfect score and acing the test. I mean, you want to do as well as you can, but I think a lot of students trip themselves up by trying to perfect every question. They waste a lot of valuable time trying to make sure one question is right when they could be answering 4 more at the end of the section. And so being really clear with yourself about what your goals are beforehand can actually help you approach individual sections of the test, because if you go into it knowing, well, you know what, I can actually miss 3 or 4 questions and still really rock this section for me, you can make sure you do really well on all the other ones.
And if you're having a hard time with a question, don't start freaking out, because then you're not going to be thinking about the question. You're going to be thinking about, oh my God, I can't figure this out, as opposed to relaxing, taking a step back, and objectively working through it. So I think that having some confidence and some relaxation, some deep breathing perhaps, could really help with your time.
Which is I don't understand how you did so well on the SAT, since you freak out about everything.
Well, the reason I did so well is because I always make sure I have more than one way to solve a problem, or I have multiple tools in my so-called toolbox that I can, take out at any time. So if I'm stuck with something, I'll try a different angle. And you want to make sure that you have these techniques, because if you're stuck on something, you don't want to just waste time on it. You can move on. But if you have something else that you can always try, like plugging in numbers, or using answer choices, or stuff that you've practiced before for the same question or a similar question, having multiple ways of solving a question is always very helpful on test day.
And I think something that trips students up sometimes is the SAT gets a lot of credit for being an objective assessment of people's abilities, and so they're like, well, no matter what I do, it'll kind of gauge my true ability, and it's not really true. It's also testing your ability to take a test, and so that can be scary. But the awesome thing is you can get much better at taking a test by practicing.
And it's not just a test; it's that specific test.
Right.
The SAT is really good at judging your ability to take the SAT, and so the only way that you can actually get better at that is to know what's on the test and know what they're going to present to you.
Yeah.
And then even beyond that, know how they make the test.
Right, and you can figure out exactly for you how fast you need to be going through the short reading comprehension passages and like how fast you need to be working through each math problem and each grid in, because you can get those timing methods down so that by the time you take the actual test, it feels really familiar and comfortable, and that's a great benefit to students.
So let's talk about that then. Talk about how the SAT test makers know that students fall into these traps all the time, and like they design the test accordingly so that there is definitely an answer that they know most students are going to pick because it seems enticing to them, and they do it in a whole bunch of different ways. How can give me some examples of those, and how can knowing what those are really help us on the test?
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing the test really loves to throw at students is trap answers, like answers that look really good but are totally wrong, and they do the same kinds over and over again. So it'll be something that seems familiar, but it's actually the opposite of what you're looking for. Or it's an answer that sounds really fancy and kind of formal, but actually it's total nonsense. It's just disguised by a certain kind of language.
Which is like totally my favorite one, that the SAT understands that some students, when they get confused, they're just going to look for the one that sounds like the smartest answer. And so they give like an overly verbose answer or an overly complicated answer that a lot of students that are going to look at it who don't really understand where to start with that process are just say, well, it has to be D. That sounds like it would be something an SAT student would answer.
Right. And so you can actually teach yourself to look for these, to be more wary of the wordy choice, which you should be anyway. And actually even to be wary of what you're drawn to first. Like in a reading comprehension question, you might recognize something right away and be tempted to write it down, but you should always double check and be like, wait, am I recognizing that because it's right, or because I'm just remembering it because it's a random word drawn from the passage? And those are they're really concrete things that you can look for, so that by the time you take the actual test, you've seen lots of the traps before. So you're not making the kind of rookie mistakes of just choosing what looks good. You're actually making kind of an informed decision.
And I think that's one of the real joys of preparing for a test, is acquiring a familiarity with these incorrect answer choices, because the writers of the SATs aren't necessarily one-trick ponies, but they're like 5, 6, 7-trick ponies. And it's the same thing over and over and over again. And once you've gained a familiarity with these incorrect answer choices that come up repeatedly, once you see them, it's almost fun. It's sort of hilarious to see, wow, what an egregiously terrible answer, and they really think I'm going to fall for it. So instead of allowing the test writers to be a step ahead of you, you're a step ahead of them, sort of using their tricks against them.
The SAT will throw you a lot of reading that you have to do, and you have to do it quickly. And so some students will go in and be like, well, you know what, I may be great at math, great at the writing section, but I'm just going to do badly on the reading section. And it's actually not true, because even things that are seemingly really hard to get around, like your reading speed, there are definite techniques that you can use to kind of turn that into a strength. And so one thing that we realized with the reading comprehension section is they'll give you these long passages, and it seems like you have to read the whole thing, you have to go back and think about it, you have to read the questions, and then by the time you go back and look at the passage again, you've run out of time. But actually, you don't even really have to read that long passage all at once. And so one strategy that we like to teach students who need to read more quickly is to break it into zones. And you can look at the questions, say there are 10 questions. The first 3 talk about the first 30 lines, the second 3 talk about the next 30 lines, the next 3 talk about the last 30 lines, and then there's one more question about the whole passage. You can actually just read it in 3 parts as you go. And so if you run out of time at the end, instead of having read the whole passage and tried to answer 10 questions at once, you've answered 8 questions, and then maybe you have to rush to the last 2. And so there are things that it seems like your reading speed is this immutable force that you can't get around, but it's actually, there's all kinds of strategies you can use.
No, it's a really good one, because I think, and this is something that we teach in class as well. There's students come in and they have all different sort of ability levels in reading, and the most common complaint we get from students is, I just read too slowly. I can't get through it in time, and I can't remember all that information.
And it's totally something that gets better with practice. I mean, the awesome thing about these strategies is you can learn them and they'll help you to a certain extent, but the more you do them, the better you get. So, the first time you zone a passage, it might take you a little while. It might take you almost as long as it would to read the whole thing. But you can get to the point where you can break down a 100-line passage into 3 parts in about 5 seconds. And so by the time you get to test day, you've saved yourself maybe a whole minute or 2, which is ages on the SAT. That's you can get to 4 or 5 more questions that you wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. So,
and I think that's something that everyone can relate to, is saving yourself time and working more efficiently, and not having to do work that you don't have to do.
I think what it comes down to is just really having a plan for test day, making sure you have practiced all the strategies you're going to execute on test day, and that nothing is completely new and foreign to you or the first time you've done something. and that you know, like when you get to a point where you're stuck or you don't know what to do, there is something that is like the next step that you can do.